going, folks? Thanks for stopping by another ADHD video. For today, we're going to be talking about the different reasons why ADHD might exist and why it might exist for you or perhaps somebody you know. So, this is sort of an update from a video I did a long time ago when I was still in my undergrad. So, I have done a bit more research since then, and I have kind of come to a new consensus. I spoke about this in another video, but I wanted to talk about it on here and make it short and sweet, hopefully, and to the point, so we can see what we can do, what might be some strategies that we might utilize, and some helpful tools. So stick around, let's do a little dive, and let's do some learning, shall we? So, for the first point, the media a lot of the time, and sometimes people tell us that ADHD goes away as we get older. It's something only that children have, or something that you might only have while you're in elementary school. So that is true for some people, but not true for everybody. So for this first type of individual, it's going to be a little bit different. So research has shown that some of us are born with ADHD. And this is due to the fact that either one or both of our parents have ADHD. Now, some research has demonstrated that if one parent has ADHD, there is a 75% chance that the child will also have ADHD. And if both parents have ADHD, well, more than likely, the kid is going to have ADHD. So that's something that's really important to know. If you are a parent and have ADHD, that might be something to consider if you're planning on having kids. Because raising children, especially if they have ADHD, is no joke and requires a lot of responsibility and a lot of endurance, as a lot of parents will tell you. So there might be something to consider. But for these individuals, what ends up happening is that in their physiology and biology, they have a lot of the components of someone who has ADHD, meaning that they have less dopamine and serotonin receptors. They have a gene mutation, perhaps, in the 4th dopamine receptor. And they might also exhibit early on many classic ADHD symptoms. So physiologically, what's going on with some of our neural pathways, the gene mutations are already there. Granted, this is, once again, speaking for somebody who is born with ADHD. Once they come out of the womb, they already got the ADHD because they genetically inherited that from either one or both of their parents. So those are people, they're the type of people that are born with ADHD. So that's the first type of person. Moving along now. So now, moving along to the second type of individual. This is somebody who was born without ADHD when either perhaps one of their parents doesn't have ADHD and they come out without the condition, or in some instances, neither parent has ADHD, so the child doesn't have ADHD. But what ends up happening is very interesting and quite important. This goes to show how important our health and our diet is. Now, research has also demonstrated what we eat greatly impacts our ADHD, either positively or negatively, depending on what we're eating. So, what might end up happening is that when the child is growing up, let's say when he's in those younger years, perhaps at the age of 2, 3, 4, and going up, now what ends up happening is if the diet of the child has a lot of factors that cause inflammation in the body and inflammation in the brain, well, what's going to end up happening is a big list of problems. Nutrients are not going to be able to be absorbed. And this might also cause issues with the gut and might cause issues with something called leaky gut. Now, I have a video that talks about our diet and our health and food and what can happen if we don't eat all that healthy. It's really important, especially if we have ADHD. So what ends up happening, going back to the example we were talking about, A child might be born without ADHD, but when they're growing up in their childhood years, if they continuously eat food that's going to cause a lot of inflammation, and it's going to screw up some of their neurochemistry, it's going to mess up their physiology and biology, what's going to end up happening is that while we're growing up, receptor sites for the neurotransmitters that we have trouble with, like the list shows, these are the neurotransmitters that research has shown, some of the major neurotransmitters that people with ADHD have trouble with. Now, I want to focus particularly on dopamine and serotonin. It's interesting how many receptor sites are in the intestinal tract. Now, what ends up happening is if we grow up eating really bad food constantly, then those receptor sites that form along the intestine and other parts of the body, they're not going to be forming as much. So with less receptor sites, we're going to be getting less of these two neurotransmitters. So with having a bad diet with a lot of inflammation, we're going to be having quite a bit of difficulty because these receptor sites that would be forming if we would be eating healthier are not forming. So what ends up happening is that we get less dopamine and less serotonin receptor sites in the intestine, the intestinal tract, and in different parts of the body. So we're not going to be getting a lot of that. And if we lack dopamine and serotonin, which is common in ADHD, we're going to start developing ADHD symptoms. And there goes a chain reaction, a domino effect, if you will, that ends up happening. So what ends up happening is other neurochemistry issues start arising and ADHD symptoms start getting worse. So at this point, we have basically written our physiological blueprint, so to speak, at least in terms of some neurotransmitters. Due to the bad diet of the child, he now has less receptor sites of major neurotransmitters that people also with ADHD have difficulty with. So the sad thing is that as a consequence of a bad diet, a child born without ADHD, due to a bad diet and not getting enough receptor sites built due to the lack of nutrients needed and lack of enzymes and amino acids, what's going to end up happening is the poor child, due to the bad diet, is going to develop ADHD. And at that point, you can't reverse that because the damage has been done already during those critical years when the child is growing up and really needs those nutrients. If the child is eating unhealthy food, he or she is messing up their neurochemistry. And because of that, they will now develop, or essentially develop, ADHD. And that's really unfortunate. But we could do something about it. There is hope. And if you're a parent or know somebody, or have a kid, or feel like this might be something to relate to you, this might be something to reflect upon. This is not stuff that we knew. This is not stuff that's commonly known out there. I know for myself, growing up, I ate a ton of junk food. It was just a thing to do. And there wasn't a lot of warnings, and we didn't have a lot of research out of these side effects that a lot of the food we were eating would do to us. So, something to reflect upon. But if you have a child right now who isn't eating all that good, you might want to reflect and might want to start helping them out with their diet. You'd be doing them a big favor. So just something to think about. We're all free to do what we think should be done. So I'm just giving the advice out there that I think eating healthy is really important because it can really make someone's ADHD a whole lot worse, or in this example, can cause someone to have ADHD if they frequently don't eat good during those younger years when they're growing up. It can really mess them up for when they're older. So if you didn't know, now we know. And now that we know, we can start doing something about it. Little by little, here and there. I have a whole video about diet, what we should be eating, what we should avoid to eat, and what can help out the ADHD, what makes the ADHD worse. So if you want to check it out, here it is on my profile. There should have been a link above at some point, and I hope you check it out, and I hope you can get some insight and some help from watching that. Now, moving along to the third type of person when it comes to ADHD, we have an individual who perhaps is not born with ADHD. And perhaps when they were younger, they grew up eating really healthy, eating a lot of good food, etc., etc. So the ADHD symptoms just never came or never started in the individual. But fast forward a couple of years later, perhaps 20 or so, when this individual no longer is a kid, maybe they're in college, maybe they're in the middle of adulthood already, and they start eating really bad or just get a bad diet going. What happens because of this? The same thing that happens when someone who's younger. Now in this case, it's irreversible because your neurochemistry has already been set during the critical years. So if you're an adult, someone who's perhaps maybe in their mid-20s or above, give or take, and you have ADHD symptoms, this could perhaps be due to a bad diet. And from what we spoke earlier, if you have issues with your gut, you're going to be having issues with inflammation. You're going to be having issues with nutrients in the body and brain taking in nutrients that it needs. And this is going to cause issues forming neurotransmitters. And a lot of these neurotransmitters are neurotransmitters that people with ADHD have difficulty with. So you could potentially be having ADHD symptoms due to the bad diet. And once you work on an elimination diet where you refine what you eat and you try to eliminate certain things that might be making the ADHD worse, once you eliminate the things that are causing the most negativity and causing your body the most problems, and especially causing your body and brain not to be able to take in the nutrients that it needs, what's going to end up happening is that the ADHD symptoms might start getting smaller and smaller, and then they might disappear completely. So, from my understanding and from what I perceive, I feel like those are the type of people who have ADHD symptoms perhaps at some point, but perhaps weren't really born with ADHD, but have ADHD as a consequence of a bad diet. So, those are the three different types of individuals I see. And this is just my hypothesis. This is just me talking about what I perceive in terms of my research so far. So there might be further research ahead that says something else otherwise, and I am fully down with that. When it comes to knowledge and researching, we're finding out new stuff all the time, and that's the beauty of it. So I just wanted to share so far where I'm at in terms of how I see it. And I really do feel that the diet is gigantically important when it comes to helping or making or breaking rather our ADHD. So I really hope you can reflect on what you eat and can perhaps refine your diet. And hopefully and perhaps maybe even refine the diet of your children, because it makes a really, really big difference, believe me, in the way our cognition works and how we can pay attention. The difficulty that comes with ADHD is no joke, and anyone with ADHD or ADHD-like symptoms will tell you. So we can help ourselves out, eating healthy, perhaps a bit of exercise. These are things that are going to help our ADHD out. Now, if you're someone who was not aware that you had ADHD perhaps and want to do something about it, well, what you can do is find out what type of ADHD that you have. There are three different subtypes of ADHD. As we can see up here in the picture, we have the hyperactive type that shows a lot of hyperactivity on the outside, a lot of fidgety, a lot of squirming, a lot of energy being driven by a motor. We have the inattentive type, which is the type of ADHD that I have, where the hyperactivity occurs in the mind, in the brain. So what ends up happening is a person with inattentive ADHD is easily distracted, forgets stuff, pretty often, gets bored easily, and has difficulty sustaining attention for quite a bit of time, or for a long time rather. And then we have the combined type, which is a combination of both the hyperactive and the inattentive, the ratio of which depends on the individual. I've met people who are more inattentive than hyperactive, and I met people who are the other way around. So that totally depends. So that might be something you might want to research and look into a bit more. But once you find out, or if you find out you have ADHD, what you can do is you can go talk to a psychiatrist or set up an appointment with a doctor to get a referral to a psychiatrist. They're going to evaluate you depending on the symptoms to see what type of ADHD that you have. And after that, you can start taking treatment. And then perhaps, if you'd like, after working with your healthcare professional, you can also start taking supplements. So I have a whole video that talks about medication and what you should know before and after starting on the quest to get ADHD treatment, how to work with side effects, and what to look into and what to research further to help yourself out. I try to bring a good amount of resources so people can see, because when I found out I had ADHD, I had to do a ton of research, and there was very little information about the inattentive type of ADHD. Thankfully now, a few years later, there's quite a bit of information out there. Not as much as I would like, but I'm trying to help with that, and I see other people are doing the same, so that's pretty cool. The ADHD community should all be here to help one another out, so it's one of the main reasons why I do these videos. But there you have it. Once you go and get evaluated for your ADHD, your psychiatrist will work with you to get a medication that's going to work best for you. And you're going to work from a really low dosage moving up, hopefully, or ideally with your psychiatrist. And let me tell you, different people require different dosages of ADHD medication. Some of us require more than others. And the side effects amongst the different types of medication vary. So there's quite a bit of information out there in regards to the different medication options. So here on YouTube, you can search up a lot of videos that go really in-depth to different medication options. So I would look into that if you're interested. And also perhaps looking into supplements. I have plenty of videos on supplements as well. And if you really want to go the full circle, I recommend you find out what your cognitive functions are. What drives you? What are the different parts of your personality? When I found that out while working in grad school and really went into cognitive functions, went into Carl Jung and the MBTI, it was absolutely fascinating. The foundation of 16 personality types is only the beginning. There are billions of different iterations of each of those 16 personality types. You can introduce two people, the same personality type, they can be completely different people. It goes to show you the uniqueness of the human mind and the human element. So once you find that out, if you're interested, I have videos on how ADHD impacts each of the 16 cognitive function personality types that you might want to check out for you and your partner, maybe somebody you know. So it's part of the healing process. Seeking treatment, modifying the behavior, and then seeing what cognitive functions you have to see what your strengths and difficulties are, and work with them to refine them and eliminate that of which costs you difficulty, or causes you difficulty rather. So refinement, balance, is what it's all about. So I hope this video was of some help to you. That's going to be it for today, folks, and stop on by for another video sometime soon. But until then, it's your ADHD comrade Wilhelm, over and out. So now that we've gone through all the points, I'd like to hear why you might think you have ADHD. Is it one of the points that we discussed? Is it some other point perhaps? And I'd also like to hear in the comment section, perhaps a food that you eliminated that really helped you out, an ingredient of any sort. Any success stories out there in terms of eliminating something for your diet? Leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other people with ADHD would love to hear and share as well. See you guys later.